Hi, my name is Megan Davenport, and I worked on the evaluation of different ice cream samples. My research partners on this research were Greg Housley, Sarah, Jake House, and Henry Campbell. Ice cream is a product whose consistency, content, and flavor profile seems universal. Many consider it a treat they will love as no matter what company produces it, as long as it's one of their flavors that they prefer or like. Our research group decided to take one of those flavors, vanilla bean ice cream, and evaluate different attributes amongst different brands. Although these brands advertise the same flavor of ice cream, they all contain different ingredients and different ratios of ingredients. Some of the brands attempt to offer a version that caters to health conscious or ingredient sensitive consumers, such as lactose free or no sugar added versions that we also used in our research. The main focus for determining the difference between each sample was using attributes. These attributes were vanilla aroma, density, color, rate of melting, and creaminess. These were the attributes that the research team felt were sufficient enough to describe the differences between each sample. These were also attributes that were previously looked up in various literature. These were also compared to that literature. The basic setup for our experiment began when researchers decided which materials would represent standards for each attribute. Once they were obtained, numerical values were assigned to each standards. Once those standards were agreed upon, training began to familiarize the panelists with the standards. 5 samples of vanilla bean were obtained by each panelist, and once those were obtained, those were served to each panelist, and it was evaluated based on a 15-centimeter line. These evaluations were taken, the data was collected, and these were evaluated using ANOVA and PCA. The researchers also served as panelist members and were Greg Housley, Henry Campbell, Lucida Sari, Jake House, and Megan Davenport. They ranged in age from 19 to 29. All panelists participated in at least one semester of sensory science and therefore had approximately the same training. They were said to consume ice cream either once every 2 months up to oftener once a day. These were at least half the panel. Various material was obtained by the panelists to represent the standards for these samples. To begin with, vanilla aroma was obtained by using a vanilla bean in a vial to keep the volatile aromas in. Each panelist sniffed 2 or 3 times and closed the lid to keep in the volatile aroma. This was rated at a 6. The next attribute was color. A paint chip from Ace Hardware was obtained, and a color named Touch of Vanilla was used to compare the brownness color of the sample to the paint chip. The next attribute was rate of melting. Each panelist took a cube of ice and placed it on their tongue, between the tongue and the roof of the mouth, and counted the time it took until the ice cube was just soft enough to crunch with their teeth. This was also rated at a 10. The next attribute was creaminess. A tablespoon or teaspoon of heavy whipping cream was placed in each panelist's mouth, and the texture and mouthfeel was evaluated. This was rated at a 6. The density was the last attribute rated by the panelists. This was rated by taking a spray can of whipped cream and spraying it into each of the panelists' mouths. This was rated at a 3 and was evaluated for texture and mouthfeel as well. The samples of vanilla ice cream obtained were Tillamook Vanilla Bean, Breyers Natural Vanilla, Dreyer's No Sugar Added, Breyers Lactose Free, and Winkle Food Vanilla Bean. All samples were obtained from vanilla, and all samples were also obtained by Tub of Ice Cream. These samples cost approximately the same price, except for Tillamook Vanilla Bean, which cost more than the rest of the samples. The nutrition labels of each of our samples were compared, and density, total fat, and sugars were compared for each sample. Density was measured in grams per milliliter, total fat in grams, and sugars in grams also. Tillamook vanilla bean contained the highest sugar content, the highest fat content, and also the largest density. Also, dry or slow churned no sugar added vanilla bean contained the lowest density, lowest total fat, and the lowest sugars. For serving, the samples were placed in plastic cups with plastic spoons. About half a tablespoon was placed in each cup. Each panelist decided to grab all samples at once and decide which serving order they wanted to place them in. Each panelist separated so that they could not hear each other, and also decided to perform the test without contact or seeing each other. Multiple tests were used to evaluate our data. The first was ANOVA, which was used to determine if there was a difference between the decisions of the panelists or between the actual samples. The next was PCA, which was used to describe the most amount of variance in the samples without using a lot of variables. There was also a correlation matrix to decide the correlation between the attributes, and also the mean separation table to list the values of samples and indicate where differences lied using Fisher's LSD. Based on our ANOVA results and using a degree of freedom of 4 for both panelists and ice cream, and also a p-value of 0.05, it was determined that significant differences lied between the panelists on color, vanilla aroma, and density. And for ice cream, all attributes were significantly different for each sample. Based on our principal component analysis results, our primary component was defined by rates of melting. This would define 65.29% of the data. Our secondary components were defined by attributes creaminess and color. These define 20.58% of the data. Together, these define 85.86% of the data. The sample's Tillamook was mostly defined by rate of melting and density. Breyer's natural vanilla was defined mostly by creaminess. Dreyer's no sugar added sample was defined as neutral, did not display many of the attributes that we were testing for, and also neither did Winco Foods vanilla bean. Breyer's lactose-free ice cream was best defined by vanilla aroma and creaminess. Based on the correlation matrix of our data, it is apparent that the highest positive correlation was between the attributes rate of melting and vanilla aroma. None of the attributes showed any negative correlation. Our mean separation of the data shows how our samples relate to each other and the differences between them. The letters next to the samples indicate similarity or differences. Samples such as Tillamook 497 has differences between Breyer's natural vanilla, sample 615, but has similarities between the rest of the samples. Although our results did not exactly match up with our predictions, we saw some of the trends that we predicted with some of the samples. With vanilla aroma, we saw that an increase in fat content and sugar content was positively related with an increase in vanilla aroma. This was seen with the highest content samples for both fat and sugar and the lowest content samples for both fat and sugar. Based on a study titled Sugar and Fat Effects on Sensory Properties of Ice Cream, this found that an increase in sugar correlated with an increase in vanilla perception, whether it was aroma or flavor. This meant that the more sugar, the higher the perception of aroma of vanilla. The same study was used to make predictions based on our rate of melting. it was seen that a higher fat content reflected a slower rate of melting. This was also one of our predictions. For creaminess, we thought that a higher fat content meant a creamier sample. Unfortunately, we did not see any correlation with the samples. The samples thought to be creamier were based on brand. Breyer's ice cream was seen as creamier than the other brands. A study done titled How Hydrocolloids Affect Temporal Oral Perception of Ice Cream was done, and it was found that higher fat content meant that a faster perception of creaminess. The creaminess in their samples were found in each sample, but it just depended on the time that the creaminess was perceived. Next attribute, color, was thought to be affected by vanilla content. Unfortunately, we could not determine the content of vanilla in each sample, so we went based on vanilla aroma and thought that the sample would be correlated with vanilla aroma. Unfortunately, we found that our samples were not strongly correlated between vanilla aroma and color. But we found from previous journal articles that the color may be related to fat content as well. It was found in an article titled Effects of Fat Replaces on Sensory Properties, Color, Melting, and Hardness of Ice Cream, that color was affected by the fat content. A higher fat content meant a wider sample. In conclusion, we found that there are differences between our samples, but there are also flaws between our testing methods, such as flaws between the panelists. The panelists may have experienced different training, and also the time period for training may have been too short. Some of our samples were best described by the chosen attributes, but there are many other attributes that could describe these samples, such as sweetness. Those described by more chosen attributes received more positive verbal feedback. The samplers were overheard taking a liking to Tillamook ice cream after the sampling was complete. The samples such as no sugar added and Winko foods were not as well accepted. This study can be expanded and also improved by using more panelists, breaking down the ingredients a bit better, such as vanilla content, using creaminess and other attributes such as sweetness in relation to other perceptions, and also more samples and more training. In conclusion, this test can be used to benefit the scientific community by providing this mix-up of attributes and providing a different intake on each sample.